chug, 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 chug,
Welcome back to the Wizard Staff. I'm your host, Guy.
And I'm Blake.
And we are two drunk novices who like to talk about EDH. We drink and swear, so you've been warned. Please drink responsibly when you're talking about children's card games. Blake, what do you want to talk about tonight?
Oh, I'm feeling like something a little bit new, something a bit different, something that we don't usually do. I was thinking cEDH, the forbidden topic.
Ooh, cEDH. Well, Blake, I don't know if you heard in the intro, but we're novices. We don't know much about EDH in general, so I don't know how we're going to be able to speak to cEDH. I wonder who that could be.
Hey guys, it's me, Braden.
Oh my god! It's Braden from the cEDH cast. Braden,
Yeah.
What are you doing here?
I'm here to help out my best buds learn all about cEDH on the special episode. Yeah. cEDH, Competitive Elder Dragon Highlander.
Wow, we're very lucky to have such a good friend like you and next door neighbor.
Yeah, what are the chances?
What are the chances? I see that you have some root beer.
Yes.
Wink wink, not nudge nudge.
Some very tasty root beer.
So Braden's here to talk about cEDH with us. We'll do what is cEDH, the metagame of Cdh, and then kind of ask Braden some questions. So Blake and I aren't the biggest, as I've said, well, we are novices, but that's why we need Braden to help us out and teach us a thing or two. But just a few questions beforehand. So how long have you been playing Magic in general?
I started playing Magic at the end of 2013, maybe the beginning of 2014. My first pre-release was Born of the Gods, but I had cards from M14. Like I had the Shadowborn Apostles, like all those, and the Shadowborn Demon that they could all sack to go get. So yeah, that's how I started out. And then after that I played some Modern and some Commander, and then I got really obsessed with Commander.
Nice. What would be your favorite card and deck as well?
So that all changed. Okay, so my most favorite card is definitely Time Twister. It's the only piece of power I actually own.
Wow.
That's probably the only piece of power I'll ever own. It represented to me, like, finally, I mean, this is like not true, but like to me it represented like the completion of like me becoming a cEDH player. It was like, you know, selling all my cards that weren't cEDH cards and just like getting a Time Twister at a GP a couple years ago. So like it was like me like finally being like, all right, this is like what I'm gonna be doing from now on. This is like what I'm gonna be playing. I love the art.
Like you're invested now.
Yeah, like I'm a shareholder in the format, you know? So I love the effect. I love how it's just 2 and a blue. Like it's like honestly aesthetically 2 and a blue is my favorite like convert mana cost, which sounds ridiculous, but like it really is. The art, I like the way that like it has like the sand of time and like the weird witch or warlock pointing at the hero who's like dissolving. I love how it says like create a new discard pile on it, which is like a ridiculous thing.
Old text.
Yeah. I just love Time Twister. I love casting it. Like the first time I ever cast a Time Twister was the day I got it, and on turn 1 I went Mana Crypt Land Time Twister, and I almost cried. Like I was like, what are the chances?
Tears of joy.
Oh yeah, like I mean I was definitely mulliganing for Time Twister, right? Like I wasn't trying to win, I was trying to cast Time Twister, and I just got lucky. So
Did you win that game too, though?
I have no idea.
Oh, okay.
That didn't matter. I was there to resolve Time Twister. That's all I was there for.
You're already getting your money's worth.
Yeah, and what's my favorite deck? I think the deck I've put the most time into is definitely medium green. So that's like Thrasios and Tymna, like adaptive, like mid-rangey deck, which are some words that mean something. But basically the deck can be very slow or very fast, and it can adapt to the table, and it plays a lot of cards like Neoform, which let you like tutor up different creatures that are important at different times in the game. And I think it's a lot of fun to play because you're always making new decisions, and you can keep hands that are just like 3 dorks and a guy's cradle, which is like so fun. So that's my favorite. I think that's my favorite deck.
And then kind of talked, but we got some root beer here. You want to say a little more about like why this is your favorite drink?
So Not Your Father's Root Beer is the root beer I'm drinking. It's 5.9% alcohol by volume, whatever that means. I used to drink a lot more, but I'm not really a big drinker. I've never liked beer. But when I was in college, I think I remember the day I moved in, I went out to dinner with my parents, and my mom ordered a Not Your Father's Root Beer. And I remember thinking, like, oh, that looks pretty good. That's, like, smells good. It looks good. And then I remember asking, like, one of the upperclassmen to buy me some. And they're like, why are you spending all this money on this when you could just buy cheap booze? And I loved it. I don't know if I loved it, but I was able to drink it, get drunk on it, and, like, not feel sick or, like, hate the taste of it. And now that I've, like, you know, I'm a more mature drinker, I don't even taste the alcohol anymore. And it's just, like, a really nice, tasty drink. It's like a dessert. It's not something I would ever get drunk on, really.
This is probably the closest thing that I've had to soda in a long time.
Yeah, it's like it's closer to a soda than like anything else, right? It is a soda with alcohol in it.
Yeah, it kind of reminds me of like what is it, like a rum and coke? You know, you taste more of the Coke, but then there's like just a little bit of that actual alcohol.
Yeah, and it's actually like helpful to the flavor, right? Or sometimes, like, when you have drinks, it's like, oh, I can just taste the alcohol, and it's like, that's a negative. Like, for some reason, this root beer, like, it tastes like good root beer, and you can tell the alcohol flavor, like, actually helps. It, like, makes I don't want to sound too, you know, into it, but, like, it just, like, kind of, like, makes it the whole palate, like, fills the palate.
The flavor profile.
Yeah, sure. I don't know. I don't know. I really like it. I'm a big dumb idiot who likes root beer. Okay, what else can I say?
Have you tried the other flavors? And I know we're already talking more about beer than we are talking about Magic the Gathering. But have you tried like the Not Your Father's orange soda, the cream one, and the ginger ale?
I think I saw some lemonade that I wanted to try, but no, I don't think I really have. That one looked good.
There's that one too. I'll just say the ginger ale tastes like ass. Like,
does it? Oh, I've heard that there's one that's like it's supposed to taste like pie, and it tastes awful.
Strawberry pie, yes.
Yeah, I've heard that one's really bad.
That one is also not good. Yeah. The ginger ale one specifically, I love ginger ale, and so I was like, I'm gonna love this, and then I like drank it, and I just immediately spat it out, and I was like,
oh, that sucks.
This is awful.
That sucks. One thing I do like is like a lot of places now have like a mix of 6. So if you do want to try something like that, you only have to get one, right? Like where I work, you can do mix of 6, and so like if you want to try a new flavor of Not Your Father's Root Beer or the Not Your Father's brand, I guess you can always just like get 6 different flavors, take them home, and just try them out, and see which one you like.
Yes, I was lucky that I had a very similar situation where I think I only bought 2 of the ginger ale, so I just then immediately handed the ginger ale one to my friend, and I was like, drink this, please. Like, I can't take this.
That's funny.
Okay, so now that we're done talking about alcohol, let's actually talk about cEDH.
Sweet.
What is cEDH? Braden, how would you describe it?
So I'd say cEDH is the most powerful way to play Magic's best format, Commander. It's sort of like a subculture that exists within the wider EDH community. So originally, like 2014 and earlier, if you like had your broken Commander deck, you just played against other Commander players, right? There wasn't like an education on like, hey, some people like playing this way, some people like playing that way. Like it wasn't really quite understood by the wider EDH community. So like there was a lot of pub stomping, and that's not really satisfying for anyone. But it was kind of like, hey, I want to play my big dumb, you know, Doomsday deck. I need to play it against someone. So that's how I got into the format. And the cEDH community kind of formed around people who were like, hey, this is not fun for anyone. What if we found other people who enjoyed playing the way we played and worked with them to make our decks better, and also create communities where people could play those decks and not ruin people's day. So I think cEDH to me is like the combination of like the decks, which are people play, and like the common philosophies and thoughts and archetypes and patterns that you end up seeing in that like community that formed around, you know, like competitive Commander in those like early years before 2016. That's how I look at it. Like if you want like a really detailed definition, or you could just say cEDH is just competitive Commander.
In case if you didn't know what the C was.
Yeah.
So how's it different from casual play, let's say?
There's like a few ways. I think the first and most important one to point out is like you're playing to win, and there's almost like a social contract that says like, hey, any play you make should be about winning this game, and it shouldn't be about winning like the next 5 games, or it should be about like winning within the single game that's happening right now. So like spite plays are not considered acceptable really. Like I've basically told people I'm never playing with you again because they make spike plays, and we had multiple conversations where we were like, hey, that's not acceptable. They continued to make spike plays, and it was like, all right, we're not meant to play together. You know?
Sorry, when you say spike play, do you mean like...
I'm attacking you with my creature, right? And my creature says like, when it deals combat damage, I draw a card. In response, you concede, right? Mm-hmm. So like, you've made an action that makes it impossible for you to win the game by conceding to prevent me from drawing a card. There's no real competitive advantage to doing that decision.
Yeah.
Except for maybe in a future game I won't attack you because I'm afraid you're gonna like ruin my game.
It's kind of similar to the you gotta scoop at sorcery speed rule, right?
Yeah. In cEDH we usually don't have to have rules like that because like we already have agreed to not play that way. Like we've already agreed that making spite plays isn't cool, and you don't have to play with people. You only have to play with people you want to play with. So if you all agree, all the people you want to play with agree not to make spite plays, you don't really need to make a rule like don't only concede at sorcery speed, you know, because you already know that. You already know don't concede to make someone sad.
Yeah, I'd say that the expectations within the cEDH meta is more well understood amongst the players.
Yeah, so that's like the social aspect. In terms of like what you actually see in a game or in decks, it's extremely low mana curve. Like you're more likely to see a Nature's Lore than a Cultivate, where Nature's Lore is just a 2 mana sorcery that gets a forest out of your deck and puts it on the battlefield. Cultivate, you know, everyone knows what Cultivate is. You're not going to see a Cultivate in a cEDH deck. It's like, oh, 3 mana, I'm supposed to already be playing my commander by the time I have 3 mana, or I'm supposed to be casting my Grim Tutor, or, you know, like if you look at the quality of cards at 3 mana in a cEDH deck, it's like putting 2 lands into play or putting a land into play and 1 in my hand is just not good enough. So you won't see a card like Chromatic Lantern either, you'll see Arcane Signet. Instead of playing like lands that enter tapped, you'll play lands that enter untapped because it's important to play something on turn 1 and turn 2 and turn 3 and like go up the curve as you do that. So that's like a pretty distinctive difference there. Politics, like, one thing I forgot to mention is that like politics definitely does exist. It's just more about manipulation and threat assessment. So like, hey, this guy's about to win, you should stop him. I only want you to stop him so I don't have to stop him, so that I have that counterspell to protect my combo and my turn. You know? Mm-hmm. So that's something you'll see a lot at cEDH tables, especially with more experienced players. Is like, there's almost like a curve where you're like, the more cEDH you play, the less politics you play, until you get like, you play a lot of cEDH, and then you start seeing like way more politics than you've ever seen. It's just the type of politics is different. We're not making deals. We're trying to like manipulate our opponents, you know?
To me, it seems a little bit more like poker, where you're trying to bluff like what you have and what you don't have, and trying to subtly, like with very slight words, manipulate your opponents to work on your behalf without them knowing, kind of stuff.
Yeah, or even just like a part of bluffing is like in cEDH, you like track what your opponents are doing very closely. Like, oh, my opponent they had the option when they played the spell to either leave up a blue mana or a red mana. That tells me a lot. If they left up the red mana, that means they probably have a red Elemental Blast in their hand, which is like a red counter spell. Where like in casual, it's like, oh, he has a Chromatic Lantern in hand, like, or on the battlefield, like, what lands he taps doesn't even matter, you know? Like,
Yeah.
So, or even like people aren't playing so many counter spells that like, you know, leaving up a blue or red land matters. Something they might not even think about.
This is a little disappointing for me to hear because I fucking suck at poker, so I don't think I'll be the best cEDH player.
It's definitely something you just like, it's not about like putting up a front, it's about like telling a story, right? You're not trying to like lie about what you have. You're trying to make it sound like what you have isn't as scary as it seems, you know?
Mm-hmm.
Like, yeah, you know, I only have 5 mana and I've only tutored once this game. Where like in reality, 5 mana and tutored once, that's enough to cast Ad Nauseam, which is like one of those powerful spells in the format.
I hear it's pretty good.
Yeah. So it's stuff like that where like you're not lying, you're just, you know, making it not sound as bad. One thing we talked about was counter spells and like what colors they are. In cEDH, a lot of people are playing a lot of different counter spells, but they're also playing spells like Silence and Veil of Summer. These are like counter spells, but they aren't really counter spells. If you're in a deck that isn't blue, you can like cast Silence, and then they have to counter the Silence, and it's like you baited a counter spell. So it acts a lot like a counter spell. Veil of Summer does the same thing, and it's actually a play pattern that comes up a lot. Like, you might play one card expecting your opponents to counter it, and if they don't counter it, you're like, oh, well, yeah, I got that through. And if they do counter it, you're like, all right, now I can go for my win, because I don't think they have more interaction. So there's a lot of stuff like that. You're kind of always looking 3 or 4 steps ahead, or you're trying to. If that's like a part of Magic you really enjoy, you might like cEDH a lot.
So thank you very much for the kind of in-depth view of what cEDH is. So I think what's also important is we kind of go and talk about the metagame of cEDH, because it seems like it's a lot different than, you know, our casual play. So Blake, I'm going to have you lead this discussion, and, you know, maybe we'll learn a thing or two. We'll probably learn a lot, actually, because novices.
Yeah, so from what I understand, it's that cEDH has a metagame like other formats of Magic. Like, once you start to get to the top end of really any format, a meta starts to form. They can, I mean, again, correct me if I'm wrong, but they kind of begin to center around certain key cards or certain commanders. There's not really a meta in casual, so that's a hard concept to grasp for I think a lot of our casual listeners.
Yeah. Actually, I think the great way of like framing this is like, if you think of your local play group as a meta, right? Mm-hmm. Like, you might be like, we have so many graveyard decks in our play group. I need to play Rest in Peace in my Enchantment Tribal deck, right? Mm-hmm. And so like, that's in cEDH. Like, if your play group was like, oh hey, I have a whole bunch of people in my meta instead of play group are playing Reanimator decks. I need to play Rest in Peace in my control deck because that's a good card in my meta. Do you kind of see how those are like 2 very similar thought processes?
Yeah.
I think in cEDH there is like there's a wider meta, but what that really is just like the people who play online playing against each other, and then they play against each other online, and then they play with their play group in paper. And so a play group in Toronto can actually affect a play group in Boston, right?
Right.
So because of that online influence. But in reality, most cEDH playgroups, in my experience, are pretty similar to local playgroups. Like, I have a playgroup in New Jersey where like tons of people are playing like very popular decks, but we have our own meta. Like, we have decks we expect that aren't expected in other formats, in other playgroups or other metas in cEDH. But in our playgroup, like, we have to prepare for it. I think in cEDH, like, there is a wider meta, but that meta is really just the people who play online. And then there are, local metas where it's far more influenced by, like, hey, like, if Shaper Savant is in my playgroup, I'm going to play against Opus Thief more than anyone else is probably going to play against Opus Thief, right? Or maybe I'll play against Food Chain more than any other playgroup plays against Food Chain. Or if I'm playing against, if Sick Robot's in my playgroup, I'll play against Hulk more than any other playgroup. So there's still quite a lot of influence, from like the individual people playing in your playgroup. So I think that's like a way you can think about it. It's just like, think of a metagame as is like a playgroup, and in cEDH, there's just a bigger playgroup that kind of centralizes a lot of the ideas. But at the end of the day, each playgroup is still going to have their own popular decks and their own ways they prefer to play. Like, my meta in New Jersey, no one played Flash Hulk because we all thought it was really boring and unfun, and we banned it. Like, we just said, hey, let's just all not play Flash Hulk, and everyone's like, yeah, let's not play Flash Hulk. So we didn't. So our meta was different. That's not normal, and that's why it got banned. But cEDH is still EDH. Like, a lot of the things that work in casual still work in competitive. It's just those things express themselves differently.
Right, yeah, it's still the same format.
Mm-hmm.
So you mentioned Food Chain earlier. I like to kind of move into like some well-known common cards. And like, so you mentioned Food Chain, and I think, correct me if I'm wrong, but this is like one of the more common cards.
Yeah.
How does it work?
So Food Chain is a 3-mana enchantment that allows you to exile a creature from the battlefield that you control. And you get mana equal to its converted mana cost. So if you exile a 3-drop, you'll get 4 mana, and you get to pick what color it is. So if I exile Lana Werewolves, I can make 2 blue mana or 2 red mana, but I get 2 mana. So what Food Chain does is there's a few creatures, Mistral Griffin, Squee the Immortal, and Eternal Scourge, and you can play them from exile. And so you play Mistral Griffin, you exile it for 5 blue, then you replay it for 4 blue, then you exile it for 5 blue, now you have 6 blue. You keep doing that till you have infinite blue, and then you can use your infinite blue to make infinite white, to make infinite red, to make infinite green, to make infinite black, and now you have infinite mana of every color.
Sounds pretty good.
Yeah. The problem with Food Chain, though, is that you can only play creatures using that mana. So if you have like a Stroke of Genius in your hand, you can't just like point stroke at yourself and draw your whole deck. You have to find a way to filter the creature mana into some type of win condition. And so there are 2 or 3 popular commanders that do this. The 2 most powerful are the first Sliver, which is a Sliver that has Cascade, and it gives all other Sliver spells Cascade. And so with Cascade, you'll basically, if you cast your commander infinite times, because it has Cascade, it'll cast every spell in your deck. And so if you have a way to shuffle your deck back in, or have a way to win the game directly by just playing a card, you'll eventually win the game. So
Wow.
often they'll just like cast the first Sliver, Cascade, do whatever. They'll just put whatever card you don't have to cast the spell off Cascade, so they'll just keep doing that until they hit Jace. They'll put Jace into play, then they'll do it until they hit Demonic Consultation. They'll exile their whole deck, and then they'll just uptick Jace and win. They might cast like Silence or Veil of Summer before then, so that they can't get interacted with, but that's generally how it works.
But here I thought Slivers were just tier 1 by themselves. Like Sliver Tribal.
No, you gotta do really you gotta do really mean stuff to make certain commanders, the best. The other option I mentioned is Ukima Kazur. Now, what you do is you just cast Ukima, then exile Ukima, then cast Ukima, exile Ukima, using your infinite mana, and eventually you'll just deal 1 billion damage to each of your opponents and win the game. And you'll gain a lot of life. But they'll be dead, so it doesn't matter.
Yeah. Wow, that seems pretty nuts. And this card like really has a history, like from going like, oh, this is a Food Chain deck around Tazri, then alright, Prosh is better, then Niv Mizzet Reborn was better, rip.
What all these creatures do is they convert your infinite mana into some resource. So Tazri gave you infinite allies. You just have an ally in your deck says whenever an ally enters the battlefield, you deal 1 damage to someone. And you just keep playing Tazri over and over again. You kill him. Then Prosh, you actually need an outlet. But the interesting thing is that Prosh goes infinite with Food Chain, which is kind of cute. Then there was the Niv Deck, because Niv puts all the multicolored cards in your deck into your hand. And Corvold also works because you can sacrifice. What you do is it's kind of complicated, but what you do is you play Squeeze on the battlefield, then you play Corvold, there goes a sacrifice trigger, goes on the stack, you exile your Corvold while the trigger's still on the stack, and then you sack your Squee. You can do that to get infinite death triggers, and then if you don't exile your Corvold before you exile your Squee, you get a draw trigger. So eventually you'll deck yourself, which is why you have to know that you can exile your Corvold in response to the trigger. But you can do that to make infinite death triggers or infinite draw triggers. So it only works with Squee though, because you have to be able to play Squee from the graveyard. So Eternal Scourge won't quite work.
Oh, I don't think I ever realized that. Oh my god.
I definitely didn't realize that.
One interesting thing about Food Chain decks is they play this card called Demonic Consultation.
I hear that card's pretty good too.
Yeah, it exiles your deck, but the interesting thing is that in Food Chain decks, it's actually a tutor, because what you do is you name a card, and then you get to basically exile your deck until you hit that card. So if you name Food Chain, you'll get a Food Chain in your hand, and you'll exile one of the creatures that you want exiled to go infinite, right? So it actually tutors for both halves of the combo most of the time. That's quite powerful.
Jesus.
One of the reasons that Ukima Khazar is so powerful actually is that you don't need another card in your deck. So if Food Chain's the last card in your deck, you can still win the game with Ukima Khazar. Where with the other ones, you actually do need a card in your deck to win. Ukima Khazar is slightly better because of that. It's pretty cool.
So is that the only win con in cEDH, or what else is there?
So the next one you have on the list is Ad Nauseam. Back in the day, you might have expected to see an Angel's Grace Ad Nauseam combo. So what that is Angel's Grace is a card that says you don't lose the game this turn, and your opponents can't win the game. And you'd play Ad Nauseam, and you lose 300 life. Maybe 200 life, and you'd have your whole deck in your hand. But if you win the game that turn, it doesn't even matter. That used to be quite a bit more powerful, but the power level of the format has kind of gotten a bit higher, and so that isn't something that you can expect to see in decks anymore. But if you're looking at older lists, or you're curious about why people don't run it, that's just some information. What people usually do with Ad Nauseam is they play a deck with a pretty low curve, maybe not an extremely low curve if they have Dockside in their deck, but a really high density of mana, so that when they resolve their Ad Nauseam, they can draw maybe 30 cards or 20 cards, and in those 30 to 20
for 5 mana, yeah, that seems okay.
Yeah, and then when they draw those cards, they might get 10 mana, or 5 mana, and so that usually gives them enough mana to be able to then use the tutors they hit, or the combos that they hit to actually end the game. Some decks just play Ad Nauseam as a draw spell, but it's not really a win condition in that deck. Sometimes they're just alright, I'll take 20 life and put Seedborn Muse in my hand, or a tutor for Seedborn Muse, and that'll be enough.
It's just value at the very minimum.
Yeah, it's an instant speed draw spell that can dig as far as you need it to dig, Sometimes it's also kind of interesting because there's a win condition on the stack, someone's about to end the game and you're oh guys, I'm just gonna play this Ad Nauseam, don't worry, I'm digging for an answer. You counter whatever win condition they have after it resolves, and then you go to your turn, you just blow people out because you have 20 cards in your hand. So that's kind of the play pattern that those decks might sometimes use.
I've piloted one cEDH deck before. It's the Get Rock deck, and I definitely remember casting Ad Naus, and I got really scared after I started to calculate how much life I was losing, and I was oh, 12 life is a lot. do I keep going?
Yeah.
But I feel like the answer is like keep going.
You can basically think of Ad Nauseam as like one of the more skill testing cards in the format, because you just have to know like, what are my chances of just dying? What cards in my deck kill me? What, like, if you're on Gitrog, you're like, all right, well, thankfully I have one of my Titans in my hand, so the average CMC in my deck is a lot lower. Or you might be like, oh, both my Titans are in my deck. Ooh, no.
Yeah, I just updated the deck to have both Titans in it. It's the one CEDH deck I'm gonna keep, but yeah, it'll definitely make me a little more cautious.
Yeah, for sure. But that means that so the reason that you'd make that change is so that your Tainted Pact and your Tainted Pact is more consistent. You can dig deeper if you're digging for like a discard outlet or a Dackmore salvage.
I love Dackmore salvage, but we'll talk about that later.
Sure.
I hear there's a merfolk that's pretty good in the format. Thassa's Oracle.
Yeah, Thassa's Oracle is pretty good. Thassa's Oracle, Jace, Wielder of Mysteries, and Laboratory Maniac all say similar things. They basically say, if you have no cards in your library, you win the game. Each of them has you work a different amount for it and has different upsides and downsides. Laboratory Maniac is the boringest. It has to be on the battlefield, and you have to draw a card, and it doesn't help you draw a card in any way, except maybe with Tymna, but like, not really. Jace, Wielder of Mysteries is 4 mana, and it's triple blue in the cost, so it's really hard to cast. It draws a card each turn and mills someone for 2, so if they like had an Imp Seal or something, it can be a little disruptive, but it almost never comes up. You know, just like being able to mill a tutor or something kind of sometimes comes up, but not really. So the fact that it says like, if you have no cards in the library and you draw a card, you win the game, and draws you a card is kind of an upside to Lab Maniac. But being a creature is actually kind of a great thing, because it means that all the creature tutors in your deck kind of become more powerful when they can get win conditions. And having a backup for Thassa's Oracle is pretty useful. So I personally prefer Laboratory Maniac of the two, at least at this moment. The third is Thassa's Oracle, which is the most broken one. It's just just absurd. It has an ETB trigger, and when that trigger resolves, you win the game if you have less cards in the library than your devotion. It also like sort of scries if you don't win the game, which is weird. Don't know why it does that. It's a 2 mana 1/3, so it's actually like not even a bad body if you're like trying to do stuff. It's really cute in Yuri Codex, because you can like play the Thassa's Oracle, you know, set up the top of your deck, and then attack with it, and return it to your hand. It's like super cute. But yeah, Thassa's Oracle is like obviously very powerful too, because you can like Neoform into it from a Mana Dork, and then it's like, oh well, you better counter this Neoform, or you better counter this Demonic Consultation, because I'm about to win, which is really powerful. The combo pieces that you often see with that are Demonic Consultation and Tainted Pact. Demonic Consultation is a 1 mana instant that says, name a card, then exile the top 6 cards of your library, then exile cards until you hit the named card. So sometimes, if it's in the top 6 card, sorry guys, the drinking is not helping.
It never does.
So, if the top 6 cards of your library contain the card you named, you just die. Unless you did that on purpose and you have a Thassa's Oracle trigger on this deck for some reason. So, and then Tainted Pact just lets you exile until you want to stop. You have to play, if you hit 2 cards that share a name, you have to stop and you don't get any cards. So you have to play a singleton deck, like down to the basic lands. Like you can only play 1 island, 1 swamp, 1 forest. But thankfully there's snow lands, so like it usually isn't a big deal.
And this is like arguably the most compact A plus B combo these days.
Yeah, I think it definitely is. And the fact that there's redundancy at different mana costs and on different types of permanents, and there's like positives and negatives, you get to basically like pick like, what do I want to play perfectly? You know, like, oh, I want exactly 2 of this effect and I don't want the Jace, or I want exactly 2 of this effect and I don't want the Lab Maniac. Oh, I don't want to play Tainted Pact because I want to play basics for some reason. alright, I'll just play Demonic Consultation. Like, no one's doing that, but the fact that you have those options is quite powerful. I mean, I guess there might be like a Yuriko deck out there, like a 2-color Yuriko deck that does that, but I'd probably just play 4 basics and call it a day.
So this next card I put down jokingly, but I'm also not sure if that's true. I'm not sure how good this card is. Dockside Extortionist. Every time someone plays this is amazing. And people are like, oh my god.
Okay, so yeah. Dockside's... so, like, if I could ban a card from cEDH right now, it'd probably be Dockside.
Really?
Wow.
I think it's, like, the most powerful... I think it's probably the most, like, degenerate card in the format right now. Which sounds absurd. Like, what I'm saying is not normal. Like, don't think I'm... This is not me...
Is this a hot take?
This is my hot take, yeah.
Oh yeah, we got one in.
It helps you, like, just race out your combo. Like, I've played... So in my Paco deck, I play Dockside Extortionist. On turn 1, I went land, Lotus Petal, Dockside. Then I played a Nature's Lore, so I ramped. And then I played Paco. So I made 6 treasures off my Dockside on turn 1. The fact that that is possible should not be allowed. Like, I just don't. I think it, like... I mean, there's a lot of parts of cEDH that completely warp the game of Magic in an unhealthy way, but Dockside does it quite a bit. I wouldn't ever ask the rules committee to ban Dockside, but, like, the card's so good.
What's crazy to me is, like, I remember, because that came out in the Commander 2019 precons, and people were, like, freaking out over, what's his name, Crick? Because they were like, 5 Rexian mana, that's so broken. And, like, we all recognized that, like, Dockside Extortionist was a good card, but, yeah, it's just funny that, like, you know, he's also in the precon, and he's making a much bigger scene than Crick is.
Yeah. I will say, like, if you ask the average cEDH player what's the best card from the set, it's definitely Dockside. I think Ian and I reviewed last year, we did, like, a 2019 review, and we were like, what's the best card from this year? And I think we both said Dockside. I said, like, I think I said something like along the lines of, like, it's going to be hard for me to believe they'll ever print a card as good as this. And then, like, a week later, they printed Thassa's Oracle and Underworld Breach. So I guess I'm an idiot. But
I love Underworld Breach.
You know, the card is definitely good. So one thing I wanted to mention, though, is that Dockside Extortionist is a combo piece in cEDH. Some decks, it's a ramp spell. A lot of decks, it's a combo piece and a ramp spell. So there's a whole bunch of cards like Baron, Master Wizard, Lord Drakus, Temur Sabertooth, and now MEL, the unicorn. They all go infinite with Dockside super easily. Lord Drakus requires a bounce spell, but it's not a big deal. It's a very powerful combo. It does lose to Curse Totem and Null Rod, which are like the 2 most popular hate pieces in the format, but not enough people are playing either of those cards right now for it to really matter, I don't think. One thing I will say about Dockside is, like, you can warp your entire deck around it. Like, I see it all the time. Like, people play Snap, which is a 2-mana bounce spell that untaps 2 lands. It's like absurd. They'll play that in their Dockside decks to, like, you know, sometimes you bounce like a Collector Oof or a Commander or something, but a lot of the time it's just bounce your Dockside. So, like, you'll cast your Ad Nauseam, draw a ton of cards, play your Dockside, make 6 mana, then bounce your Dockside, replay Dockside, make 6 mana.
This is beginning to sound a little bit crazy.
It is crazy. It's, like, broken, you know?
It's just now starting to sound crazy, Blake. Where have you been the last 42 minutes?
Yeah, so Dockside, 10 out of 10. It's not the best combo in the format. It's not even necessarily the best card. It's just it just warps everything, and it punishes people so much for playing Magic. It's like Mystic Remora for mana, you know?
Yeah, that sucks. I love to play artifacts, and I don't want someone to have more than me.
Oh, they're gonna have a lot more than you.
Oh, no. So, what are some other key cards, you'd say?
Like well-known win cons?
Yeah.
So, one is Underworld Breach plus, like, a ton of cards. One of them is, like, Braden Freeze, but there's, like, several examples. Basically, Underworld Breach goes infinite with quite a few cards like LED, Lotus Petal. You can just start to make absurd amounts of mana. A common thing I see is, like, with an Underworld Breach in play, Brain Freeze myself, mill myself for like 30. Then I'll cast Lotus Petal a couple times. Then I'll cast Brain Freeze again, targeting my opponents. Then I'll play Mnemonic Betrayal, cast all the cards from their graveyard that I stole from them, win the game. I mean, they can also just mill themselves for a ton, make a ton of mana, then play Thassa's Oracle. That also works. Like, so there's this thing called layering in cEDH, which is like the concept that like your win conditions like kind of layer together to like be synergistic.
Like overlap?
Yeah. So if one of your combos is milling yourself out, so you have tons of cards in your graveyard for Underworld Breach, Thassa's Oracle is really good. You know? Like, oh, I have a Thassa's Oracle in my graveyard. That's nice. I'll just play that and win the game. And the cool thing with Breach is that, like, oh, now I get to cast my 1-mana counter spells to back up my win condition because I can cast all the spells in my graveyard. So that's like a thing that people are doing.
Damn.
And the sad thing is like the last 3 things we mentioned are usually in the same deck. So like they're doing Breach stuff, Ad Nauseam stuff, Dockside stuff, and Consult stuff. So like all those things layer together really well. Yeah. I guess one thing I should mention is there's a lot of decks that just try to like grind out value. Like if you've ever heard of Medium Green, that deck does that. So like you could almost call Seedborn Muse a win condition, where like resolving a Seedborn Muse with a Thrasios and just like making land drops during my opponent's turns, drawing cards during my opponent's turns is just enough to win the game.
Seems good.
That's another common-ish thing. There's also just like Najeela beats. If someone just kills you with a Najeela, that's pretty good.
Yeah, like that's what's always like funny to me. It's like cEDH players will talk about like Najeela beats, and like as a casual player, you're just like, it's a 3/2. What are they talking about? But 3/2 is actually like a big beat stick, kinda.
Well, it's like it's a beat stick, but the problem is like once they have 2 tokens, that's it. That's game over. Like once they've made, it's really 3 tokens. Once they've made 3 tokens, they have so many tokens that you can't block them all, and so they're always replacing themselves. And then once they have enough that they're not replacing themselves but are positive, it's just a clock. It's like, how long until we're dead? Can someone win before these tokens like clear us out? And then the Najeela players, they're sitting like with a grip of counter spells, and it's just like, oh, you can try. You can try. But nah, it's not worth it. You'll just lose. It's an interesting thing in cEDH. I talked about this with Pongo the other day, the guy who created Najeela, the like Najeela deck that most people know. And he was saying that a lot of the time, it's not worth it to go off, because if you go off and you don't get there, which you might not think you can, you'll have used up all the resources of your opponents to stop you, and then the person who untaps after you will just be able to get away scot-free, you know? Like, oh, my opponents don't have any counterspells anymore because they just stopped this guy, so I guess I'll go for it, and they'll probably win. So there's kind of like a game of chicken sometimes in cEDH, where it's like, if I go for it, I might win, but I'll probably die, so I won't go for it. And if your deck is able to take advantage of that, you can usually win the game. And that's kind of what Medium Green and Najeela sometimes do. But some decks, like the decks that play Dockside, Demonic Consultation, Ad Nauseam, and Breach, they might be so fast that they can just get under that little game and don't have to worry about the consequences of their actions. It's like the little game that happens in cEDH. Everyone's trying to get under, get above, or slide a win in somehow. It's a lot of fun.
If I haven't said it already, damn.
Seems like there's a very like narrow window of margin of error that you can make as a cEDH player. Like every move you have to make is very calculated. It's not like, oh, I'm just gonna like sit back, text on my phone for a little bit.
Oh no, it's that is a downside to some people. I mean, to me, that's an upside. Like, I don't want to like, I'm there to play the game, you know? I'm there to hang out with my friends and talk, but I also want to play the game. Like, the fact that it's so distracting that I don't have time to be on my phone, I see that as a positive. Like, I'm on my phone all day. Like, the fact that there's something more interesting than Reddit is like pretty great. All right. The one last thing I want to talk about was Notion Thief, or Narset, or Chains of Mephistopheles. Basically, a card that makes it so your opponents can't draw cards, plus a Wheel of Fortune effect, is usually enough to win the game, depending on your board state. So, if you have a Notion Thief and you resolve a Wheel of Fortune, you'll have 28 cards in hand. Your opponent will have 0 cards in hand. You're probably going to win that game.
Damn.
If you have a Narset in play, you'll have 7 cards. Everyone might have 1, depending on what you did before that. That might not be enough to win the game, but it might be enough to like close it in a little bit, depending on what you drew. Like, I've played games with my Paco deck where I have like 30 cards in exile, and I'm like, alright, sure, but if you want to make everyone discard their hands, that's fine by me. That just makes it easier for me to win. So, it definitely depends on the board state for like Narset and Chains, but for Notion Thief, it's like, can you beat me with 0 cards in hand? Probably not.
Just watch me try.
I have a quick story. So I went to Command Fest 2019 and I met Cameron from the Laboratory Maniacs, and we played a game of cEDH. He was playing his Niv Perun deck, and there was a Chains in play, and that Chains was like the only thing stopping him from like just dominating that game.
I love Chains. It's in my Yuriko deck. Like, it's so cool because Yuriko is like a reveal and put into hand. So like, and so is Ad Nauseam, and so is Necropotence. So like, I'm playing all these like aggressive draw engines that don't say draw on them, and then I get to play Chains for free. It's like, it's so fun. It's so fun.
I need to buy a Chains.
Yeah, you do.
I traded for it using all the Judge promos I got this year.
That's a good idea.
I was like, here's a pile of Judge promos. Will you please take these for a Chains? And they were like, yeah. And I was like, all right, fair trade. Sweet.
Wait, are you a judge?
Yeah.
Oh my god, I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Damn.
I became one in December.
This just says, do your research before you interview someone.
I think it's like only on my Twitter. It's like my Twitter description is something like L1 judge. So it's not a big deal.
So we can just like harass you with a ton of questions.
Oh yeah, for sure. Just make my life a living hell, please. I'm just teasing. No, I love answering judge questions. If anyone ever has a judge question, feel free to reach out. I have the judge role on like quite a few Discords, and I just get random pings at like 3 a.m. when they're like, "Judge, how does Oko work with Mages of the Moon?" And I pretend I didn't see it until the next morning because it's not a ruling I want to make.
And it's like, I got up at 3 a.m.
Yeah, exactly. No, I think I did eventually. I think I answered, I honestly don't know. That I went to sleep. Because that one is tough. Layers are hard.
Can you explain Opalescence and what's that one other card?
Humility?
Yeah.
Who knows?
You don't have to. I know that's just like the question that like memes on all judges.
I think I know how that one actually works. The judge questions that I remember from the judge test that were complicated was like, this card says make tokens with haste, and then this card says make tokens and then they gain haste, and then it had that enchantment from Ravnica that's like whenever you make a token, make a 4/4 angel instead. And it was like, what's the difference?
Oh, yeah.
And I was like, what? And then I saw it. It's like if the tokens gain haste, so they enter as 4/4 angels, and then they gain haste, where one of them is like a token with haste, and so the angel doesn't have haste because it's not a token with haste. It's a odd niche ruling I just remember from my judge test.
Nice.
Sorry, you cut that out.
No, that's fascinating.
Well, it's good to know if anyone on this podcast wants to become a judge, ever, have access to those judge promos.
Oh yeah, it's great. And you can go to judge conferences and they give out judge promos there once the world's back to normal. The judge test is not easy, but it definitely is it's like an accomplishment, but it's also not so difficult that I wouldn't suggest like anyone to do it. Anyone who I think is a good person, I would suggest become a judge. Yeah, it's like being a judge is great. You just have to be able to, realize when you have to be able to like, what's the word I want to say? Like when I'm being a judge, I just have to like keep track on like how I'm acting, how I'm coming off.
Be professional.
yeah, but like it's different because you're like it is. I mean, obviously, like being professional in one environment is different from another environment. But like often, Magic players are not great at like communicating, and a lot of problems stem from communication. And so, like when you're dealing with someone who's having an issue, probably with communication, like making sure you're communicating clearly to them is like very important. And like even just something like your stance or the way you treat them or what you call them or making sure you like, being as respectful as possible while also being firm is like important. And that's like stuff I'm interested in improving on as a person. So I'm really happy to be a judge and be able to go to the conferences and improve on that stuff. So hopefully no one who's a judge listens to this podcast to hear about how bad of a judge I am. Talking about the judge program. I'm sure I'm not doing it justice. But yeah, I suggest anyone become a judge.
I know we don't want to go too much into this, but can we get like a short elevator pitch version, I guess, of each of kind of like the quote-unquote top tier commanders out there in the world of CDH, except we
just so we can kind of get a picture.
Except when we get to the Gitrog monster, we need to spend at least 15 minutes on him because
for sure,
it's the Gitrog monster.
Oh, fuck off!
Sure. So we'll start with Thrasios and Tymna, I guess.
Oh yeah, that's a good place to start off and just kind of address the elephant in the room. That is like, why is partner so good? Because I'm not sure casuals understand that.
Yeah, so like, if you think about it, drawing cards is better than almost anything your commander can do, right? Like, if your commander says like, when it enters, if it's like 4 mana, enter the battlefield, draw 3 cards, that's probably better than like the vast majority of 4 mana commanders, right? Like, it might sound ridiculous, but like, just drawing cards is very good. Especially in cEDH, where you're like trying to like dig for answers and like grab resources and convert one resource to another resource. Being able to do that efficiently is like hyper important. It's like probably the most important thing. Thrasios converts mana into more mana. It converts mana into cards, and it does it at like a decent efficiency. And with the help of like Training Grounds or Biomancer's Familiar, it does it with offensive efficiency. Like, it is wrong. It is a failure of the design to be that good. Tymna, on the other hand, lets you convert your mana in the form of like mana dorks or like Faber Welder, like those kinds of cards. Like, those are mana. When you play them, pay 1 mana, pay 3 mana, pay 2 mana, whatever you're paying for mana to get more mana. Tymna can convert those resources into card advantage by just like attacking your dorks at someone else. Or if you play like a turn 2 Thrasios into a turn 3 Tymna, you can just attack with your Thrasios at someone and draw a card. So Tymna backs up that like primary game plan of like drawing cards, making mana, doing all that with just drawing even more cards. And the interesting thing is that it gets through Curse Totem, which is like one of the best hate cards against Thrasios, because Curse Totem says you can't activate abilities of creatures. So if there's a Curse Totem in play, you can't use your mana dorks. So Thrasios and Tymna allows you to convert your mana dorks into card advantage, so you can just throw your dorks at someone, maybe they kill one of them, but you still draw cards. You just cracked a dork to draw a card. That's pretty good.
It replaces itself at the very least. It's almost like card advantage is a key resource in a resource-based card game.
Yes, for sure. I just think it's underrated in casual because you're not trying to optimize, right? In casual, you're just trying to have a good time. You're not spending like every waking minute thinking about how can I get more cards out of my commanders. So the interesting thing there about Thrasios and Tymna is they like are a perfect counter to each other, right? One is like great at converting one resource to another resource and also like has a natural weakness. And Tymna just naturally pairs with that weakness and lets you like convert those cards that might have been turned off into different cards. Additionally, being so cheap means that like you can like conceivably go turn 1 Thrasios, turn 2 Tymna, which is just absurd. Or like, my favorite play is to like go like turn 1 land, Mana Crypt, Bloom Tender. Next turn, play Thrasios, tap Bloom Tender, tap Mana Crypt, activate Thrasios. Then on turn 3, play Tymna. My Bloom Tender taps for 4 mana to draw a card, or just draw a card, or just do something else. They play a Seedborn or something. So there's a lot of like intricacies there that are not initially apparent, but the partner pairing is just absurd. Like the fact that they back up each other's natural weaknesses, the fact that they're so close on curve, the fact that they are the best colors in the game, really. Maybe red's a little bit better. Red's definitely better than white, but Tymna is just such good card advantage, it doesn't matter. Like, yeah, it's the real deal.
Do you think they'll probably stay at the top for the reasonably foreseeable future?
No, I think Tymna Crom might be better now. Like today, a reasonable person could tell me that Thrasios and Tymna is worse than Tymna Crom, and I like would listen to their arguments and possibly agree with them. I'll say that's like the state of the format. It's like there's a big, there's like a paradigm shift happening right now, and so people are figuring it out. So, and that paradigm shift is called farm, which is like
with cows.
No, it's like Bruce. It's like a reference to Bruce Tarl being a farmer. It's a really bad joke. It doesn't even make sense anymore because the deck isn't on Bruce anymore. But some of them are.
Yeah, I was really confused where the word farm was coming in on this.
Yeah, it's a bad name. It's a good name and a bad name. It's a good name if you care what the words mean. It's a bad name if you care what the words mean. It's a good name because it's just so easy to say. It's like, it's a farm deck.
Mm-hmm. To be honest, I was a little like, I'm gonna say like triggered when he said blue farm, because I was like, what is blue farm? And I didn't want to type that into Google as in like, what is blue farm? Because it kind of reminded me of when I was like 10 and I typed in, what is blue waffle? And then like, I'm scarred for life.
No, it's not at all like that, thankfully.
Oh my god.
So yeah, like this paradigm shift. I guess we can talk about the next best command. I think the next best partner pair, right? And that's Tymna Crom. So you still have Tymna, but where Tymna is like a counter to the hate that's on. It's interesting. Tymna is a counter to the hate that's often against Thrasios. Crom is a counter to the natural existence of blockers for Tymna, right? And Crom is also a stacks piece.
Mm-hmm.
Which is not initially apparent, but it's a stacks piece that also provides card advantage. So it's almost like a Rhystic Study that's way worse in the command zone, but even a way worse Rhystic Study is still pretty good.
It's still pretty good.
Yeah. So Tymna, has the text, whenever an opponent is dealt combat, it's like at the beginning of your second main phase, draw X cards and lose X life, where X is the number of opponents who are dealt damage. Crom says, whenever an opponent casts their second spell per turn, draw a card. It has haste and flying, and it's a 4/4. So it's a huge body with flying and haste. So if you think about that with Tymna, right? Like now you're guaranteed to get a card. You're like each opponent is not going to have a blocker for Crom. So Crom's definitely getting in to draw a card off Tymna. And now in some metas, Crom's drawing 3 cards a turn because one opponent's going to play like a rock into its commander, right? All right, you draw a card. Another player's going to go like upkeep, tutor, then play a win condition. All right, they fight over it. Oh, you just drew 2 more cards, right? Then the third player might just go land pass. So on average, in some metas, you might draw 3 cards a turn, but then you're also drawing off Tymna. So now we're talking like 4 more cards a turn just out of the command zone. So it's they're quite powerful, and the color combination is great because you get access to Dockside Extortionist, Demonic Consultation, Tainted Pact, Labman, Thassa's Oracle, Underworld Breach, Brain Freeze, Notion Thief, Wheel, all these things we just talked about ad nauseum, they're all in that deck. And they layer together really well. So that's why it's so powerful. Now you don't get to play as strong of a you might not get to play as much of a grind plan, but Tymna and Crom do that on their own pretty well, so who cares?
Wow. Yeah, that's a lot of cards.
Yeah, sorry. I hope I'm not talking too fast.
No, it's perfect.
Alright, so the first sliver is just, we kind of mentioned it earlier, it's just a food chain deck. You have access to all 5 colors, so the card quality is the highest. Although the fact that you don't have to play like weird combo outlets, you don't really have to play combo outlets in Food Chain Sliver, but the fact that you can have like no cards in deck and win with Ukima Khazra allows you to have a little bit more freedom, although the lack of squee means that you don't get to run all 3 creatures, which is also a little bit of a problem, so they're both pretty close, Ukima Khazra and the first sliver.
Like they play out similarly?
Yeah, I'd say they're both like 90% the same. Although certain Ukima Khazra decks are able to say like, hey, because I don't have to play these win conditions, I can just play a different combo in my deck. So like my friend Ian, who I do the cEDH cast with, has a deck that's like a Hermit Druid deck. So they play Hermit Druid, tap Hermit Druid, mill their whole deck. Then they have some way to win. When that happens, dread returning a Thassa's Oracle usually. So using those freed up slots lets you play another combo, which is kind of interesting. But that's like a person-to-person decision. Most people are probably just playing a standard food chain deck.
Yeah, I've lost a first sliver. It was like at Command Fest 2019. And I was blown away by how it won. I didn't even see that coming. I mean, that part of that is my inexperience, but I'm just like, oh wow. Wow.
Yeah, there are definitely games where, like, I've had games with that deck where I go, like, turn one. The games where you have a Gemstone Cavern are insane, because you can be like, Gemstone Cavern, play a tutor before my turn, go to my turn, draw the card, get my combo, win the game. It's not an impossible thing, which is kind of insane. So, the deck's crazy fast, although there are faster decks. There are a lot of faster decks. That's kind of one of the complaints, actually, of recent food chain decks, is that some people have said, like, oh, they're a little bit too slow, even though they're crazy fast. Like a half turn, if your goal is to get under if you think of it, like, there's decks that are trying to do different things in different parts of the game. If you're trying to get under everyone, like, before people can even interact to win the game, a half turn on average is huge, right? Like, that can be like the difference between win or lose. And so some of the criticisms is that food chain just is like a half turn too slow in comparison to, like, farm or the Inala combo decks.
Is the answer to that problem just in the future we get more food chain creatures?
No, it's probably, well, maybe in Ukimakazer, to be honest, that could be the case. The answer to that problem is probably just, like, the meta adapting and playing hate that's good against Ad Nauseam, but not good against First Sliver. Like, and the First Sliver has problems, like, or just food chains in general have problems. Like, if people are on Rhystic Study, they can't win through Rhystic Study. Because to make infinite mana, they have to let people draw their decks, basically, which is not a good idea. So, if the meta gets super, super fast, right? Sure, people might be more prepared for them in the early game, but people might not be playing cards like Rhystic Study, so maybe they can get a couple more free wins. So, you know, it's also opinion. Like, some people will probably hear me say that, like, food chain's kind of looked down upon a little bit lately, and they might be like, what do you mean? Everyone loves food chain. So this is just some of the things I've noticed. It's not necessarily, like, a fact, right? Like I said at the beginning, like, play groups are kind of like, there's play groups, and then there's, like, a centralized online meta. And so, like, my playgroup has a lot of people who play in the centralized online meta, but our experiences aren't going to match the people who play in that online meta. So, you know, I'm going to have different opinions than maybe Shaper or Sick Robot or, you know, or Ryan from Playing with Power.
On that note, I think from a casual player perspective, looking from the outside in, I think the general perception is like, oh, all CEDH players think the exact same way. And while they might think about a lot of things in the same terms, there's still quite a large amount of people, like, you know, arguing with each other and trying to figure out what's optimal and what's not. Just having a difference of opinion.
Yeah, I was saying this the other day, but, like, there really isn't anyone who plays cEDH who's, like, a Pro Tour player. Like, most of us are just, like, very, very intensely interested casual players, right? Like, there aren't any Pro Tours. There's no reason really to get into this format except for just the curiosity and, like, the ability to, like, make a name for yourself in a community. And so we aren't, like, the average best cEDH player is not that much better than an average good modern player, right? Like, the top 1% of Magic players aren't playing cEDH. So, like, that's kind of a good thing, I think, because, like, it means that, like, someone who isn't really that great at Magic can become good at cEDH and then make a name for themselves and learn a lot about the format and then go back and be, like, just fine at release, you know? It's not that, like, cEDH players are bad at Magic or EDH players are bad at Magic. It's just that there isn't 25 years of, like, written philosophy, you know?
Not yet.
Yeah, I mean, like, 25 years from now, it'll probably be different, but, like, someone had to write Who's the Beatdown, which is, like, one of the most famous Magic articles ever written. There isn't really a Who's the Beatdown for cEDH. Like, no one's made that content yet, and we don't know what that content will look like when it finally does happen. Until, like, 10 years later when everyone's like, hey, remember that video or article made by who's and who and what's and what? So the format's in such it's in such an infancy that there just aren't people who, like, when you talk to them, you're like, oh, this guy gets it. When I talk to Shaper, like, I think Shaper's, like, incredibly informed about cEDH, but I don't think Shaper is, like, I don't think Shaper is like the same as like LSV, you know? Like there just isn't an LSV for CEDH. We just aren't there yet. You know? There's no incentive for someone to, like, I was listening to Drive to Work today, the podcast by Mark Rosewater.
Oh, so was I.
Same.
Oh my god.
Did you listen to the Chris Bakula episode?
I just did. I'm all caught up again.
Yeah. So he talks about how, like, people today will go to a tournament, go to a city 2 weeks before an event, and spend 2 weeks sitting in a room with other people who are going to play in that event, testing the format. No one does that for cEDH, you know? So, like, there just isn't that level of, like, solved, you know? And because it's multiplayer, we might never get there. So it's like adding an additional dimension to the game.
And the question on that is, I think that's okay. Like, if we never get to that point.
Yeah, I agree. I think, like, it is fun that in the CEDH community you can just, like, start up a YouTube channel, make a deck list, and, like, people are like, oh, that's that Braden guy. You know, like, I haven't done anything particularly impressive yet. Some people know who I am.
What do you mean? This interview right now isn't the impressive part?
Well, once this interview is out, we'll have done something impressive.
Exactly.
But not yet. Not yet.
Now, do we want to move into... Just that we spent 15 minutes on our favorite frog, but let's just talk a little bit about the Gitrog monster here, because I love him so much.
Sure.
Yeah, this is the one that I think I have built... Well, originally I built Leptus's deck list, and then when I joined the Gitrog server, as I was introduced to by your interview with Into the North, I learned that my deck was actually outdated, so I had to buy another Titan, and I'm working on buying some other cards that cost a lot of money.
Yeah.
But the Gitrog monster, yeah, we love him.
Yeah. It's the most popular deck in cEDH, most likely.
Really?
Like, if you were to... It's the most popular Discord, and for a short time, the cEDH Facebook page required you to answer what your favorite deck was. We had to stop because people were submitting answers that made me want to deny them, and I thought that would be wrong. So I was like, instead of denying people based on what their favorite deck is, I'm just going to remove the question.
That's good.
Like, people would be like, the question was, what was your favorite cEDH deck? And someone would answer, like, I don't know, like, the Cat Equipment Tribal
Kemba
Commander. And I'd be like, yeah, Kemba. They'd be like, Kemba. And I'd be like, that isn't...
Have an aneurysm.
So we just removed the question. Yeah, but for the short time that existed, Gitrog was by far and away the most popular commander. So it's not surprising that that's the one you chose to build.
You're a predictable guy.
Mm-hmm. I guess I am. So the idea about that, because I feel like this is the only time I'm going to be able to, like, speak to cEDH as a format, is like you get the Gitrog monster out, and he's a 3 black-green. He has Death Touch, and you can play an extra land on your turn, and whenever a land goes to the graveyard, you draw a card, and you also have to sack a land at the beginning of your upkeep every turn, or sack the Gitrog monster. So that land going to the graveyard is the most important part, because then you look for a card like Dakmor Salvage, which has the dredge factor on it, so it's like dredge 2. So you find a discard outlet. I'm just going to say Oblivion Crown. So you get that, discard Dakmor Salvage a bunch, get the dredge cards into your graveyard. Hopefully you're hitting lands, so then you get Gitrog to go off, and then you just create a bunch of infinite, or quote-unquote, infinite draw triggers to pretty much draw your whole deck and then win from there. Pretty much, right?
Yep. Yeah, so you can go to this place called Cozy Land,
yes,
where you basically have only 2 cards in your library, a land and Kozilek, and you discard a card, you discard a Dakmor Salvage, you mill the 2 cards, you get a shuffle trigger and a draw trigger. You discard deck more salvage. You can keep doing that, stack more draw triggers, and eventually you will have an infinite draw triggers, and you can start using those to deterministically do really scary stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So, and then once you want to get rid of your infinite draw triggers, you just shuffle your deck over and over and over and over and over again. So
I have a question for you.
yeah, it's a pretty wacky deck. Yeah.
Yes, Blake, I'm happy to answer questions about the Gitrog monster.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I assumed it was me. I'm sorry.
No, I was talking to Braden.
Well, fuck you.
So when someone demonstrates a loop with Gitrog, do the opponents typically scoop, or do they always make them play them out? That takes a long time.
So it's considered bad taste to make them play it out, past showing that they can factually do it. So if you ask them how do you do it and they explain it in the correct way, usually people will scoop, and then some people will say, can you show me the cards involved? And then they'll scoop. And then some people who I don't play with because I don't think they respect anyone's time enough will force people to play it out. In a tournament, you're basically never going to be forced to play it out. You may have to explain it.
Like KCI loops.
Yeah. But you will get slow play only if you try to do the end step sculpt, which for very, 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 very complicated reasons that no one should even know about.
Right, we don't have to get into the nitty-gritty.
It's too complicated for this podcast, at least.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Gitrog is a pretty unique commander. It's very low colors, very affordable on a budget. You can start at I've literally done this. I've started at a $50 budget deck and then just bought the expensive cards until I owned the whole deck and then sold it. I literally owned the deck, everything but a Bazaar, and then I sold it all to buy a legacy deck. So it's definitely not it's not a deck that you want to play for $50. Probably isn't really a CEDH deck at $50, but at about $300, $400, $500, you start to actually have a proper CEDH deck.
Okay.
Which is pretty reasonable.
And we'll probably touch on the affordability of decks later on.
For sure.
Sure.
Thank you for humoring me and going on that froggy journey. We got a couple more commanders that we're going to quickly touch on, and then we'll get into some questions with Braden. So, Najeela, can you kind of explain that combo a little bit?
Yeah, sure. So, basically, Najeela plays a couple cards that untap your lands or mana rocks whenever you deal damage with one of your tokens, and then you use that mana to activate Najeela. You just do that over and over and over and over and over again until they die, and you have a lot of life and a lot of tokens. Nature's Will and Derevi are the two most popular ways to do that. I'm sure there are other ones, but those are the only ones I think people actually play. You play tons of interaction. It's sometimes called a tempo deck, sometimes called a mid-range deck. It doesn't really fit into a lot of the CEDH terms, really. It's like a protect the queen strategy, really. The deck's able to mulligan in a very interesting way because it can kind of just depend on that turn 2 Najeela with counter magic backup, which is very powerful.
Yeah, I will say that this is the deck that I am attempting to slowly buy in paper, because similar to you, Braden, I am picky and I want to have actual real cards, but it's taken me a while because it's 5 color.
Yeah, I have no problem with people proxying, really, except for in a tournament setting, but even that's a hot take. The CEDH community, just because individual people say they're not pro proxy, I don't identify as pro proxy. I allow people to proxy. I don't have a huge problem with it. But the CEDH community as a whole, I do not want to misrepresent it. It is super pro proxy. It is militantly pro proxy. If you are anti proxy, it's not that you shouldn't play CEDH, but you should just know that going in. You can find a playgroup that doesn't want to proxy, but a lot of playgroups will because the format is so expensive. So that's just something you should be aware of going in.
All right.
So can you talk about this next one too? Because this is actually a deck list of yours that's on the database.
Yeah, so if anyone isn't aware, the database is the cEDH Decklist database. It's a collection of deck lists that are considered CEDH decks. Again, as everything related to cEDH, it can be a little controversial, but for the most part, if you see a deck on there, it's probably good enough to take to your local like F&M. This is a deck I have just kind of been piecing together over time. So it's like a Kenrith deck. Kenrith is 5 mana, has several abilities. One of them says draw a card, one of them says reanimate a creature, and one of them says put a counter on things. One of them says haste, and one of them says gain some life. Has a ton of abilities, but you're really there for is the drawing a card and reanimating a creature, and sometimes giving haste. So the deck plays Demonic Consultation and Thassa's Oracle. Being able to reanimate your Thassa's Oracle if it dies or gets milled is super powerful, especially instant speed. Being able to have an infinite mana outlet if you're on Dockside, which the deck is on, it's very powerful. The deck does some really interesting things with like, I'm actually not sure if my list is on it, but it should be Phantasmal Image, where like, if you make a Phantasmal Image a copy of Dockside, you can kill it by putting a counter on it, and then reanimate it with the 5-mana ability. So if your Dockside makes 8 counters, which is quite a lot, but not like impossible, you can then make infinite mana that way. So there's a lot of like weird intricacies and combos and stuff. That's a trick that Hire taught me, who's like a much more well-regarded Kenrith player than I am. So definitely check out his list if you can find it. So yeah, and then the Dockside infinite mana stuff is also involving Emil, the unicorn. So just blink Dockside a lot, make infinite mana, make some creatures really big, and attack. Or kill people with mill.
How's that unicorn working out?
I haven't actually played the list since it was updated, but I've seen a lot of other people playing it. It's broken. It's like people think Deadeye Navigator is good. Get ready. This is 4 mana. It's insane.
I remember 2 years ago where people were like, ban Deadeye Navigator, get rid of it.
Yeah. Yeah, that was silly.
Yeah, I don't think that's going to be a problem.
Yeah, it's pretty nuts.
Alright, I was just kind of curious.
Alright. The last one we have here is Urza Howard High Artificer. It's like an infinite mana deck that also plays some stacks pieces. Not a huge fan of Urza. A lot of people have been kind of like losing favor of it.
Oh, really?
But I will say it's again one of the most popular decks. So the problem with Urza is it loses it to Null Rod and Curse Totem, which is like a thing that your deck never wants to do. So that's like a huge problem for the deck, is like that kind of awkwardness. It's also being mono blue reduces your amount of interaction. Like you don't get to play Dogen's Veto, which like is kind of significant. You don't get to play Vampire Tutor. Like being in mono blue is pretty constricting. So being in mono blue and not being able to play Curse Totem also is a huge deal. Like Curse Totem is one of the best cards in the format to like hate out on lots of other decks, and not be able to play that in mono blue is like pretty rough.
Okay. Alright, so now we're going to wrap up a little bit here. And so, Braden, where could our guests find you on your social media links?
Alright, so I am a co-host of the cEDH Cast. That's a YouTube channel. It's just cEDH Cast. It's a pretty simple name. It's like Wizard Staff. It has 2 names, 2 words.
You okay there?
No. I drank a few too many root beers. One too many? Who knows? Language is hard. Yeah, so we're on YouTube, Twitter, Discord.
And you're on iTunes and Spotify, right?
Oh yeah, we're on there too. Sorry, that's like the social media. We're on Spotify, Stitcher, SoundCloud, iTunes.
Anywhere that you can find podcasts.
If you're listening to Wizard Staff right now, you could probably type to whatever search bar exists on whatever platform that is and find us.
Awesome. Alright, so thank you very much, Braden, for being on the podcast tonight. It was great having you, and hopefully we can get Ian on so he can get really drunk too at some point. So
hit us up, Ian.
We are the Wizard Staff. You can find us on iTunes, Stitcher, Spotify, and anywhere else that you listen to your podcasts. Same with the cEDH Cast. Make sure to leave a like and review. We want to try and get our sub count up so we can get onto all those nice channels. You can find us on YouTube, Facebook. Just type in Wizard Staff, as well as Instagram and Twitter. We're at WizardStaff101. And then you can send us an email at thewizardstaff101@gmail.com so you can bitch and complain about how stupid we are.
Please.
So thank you very much for listening, and we hope you had a great night. We'll see you again real soon. All right. Peace.
Peace.
Bye.